If you're at all interested in fantasy, then you've definitely heard about the video game Elden Ring, published by FromSoftware Games Studio in February of 2022. And while it's only been a few years, in internet time, it's been forever. And still, people are talking about the game. Now, I know the DLC just released last week, but I think the sustained popularity of Elden Ring and the other Soulsborne games has to do with something more fundamental than a well-done DLC or game release. So let's talk about fantasy world building, loyal fan bases, and the persevering relevance of Elden Ring. Like I said before, Elden Ring came out in 2022 and is an action RPG video game developed by FromSoftware Games and Bandai Namco Entertainment. It is a fantasy game from the mind of Hidetaka Miyazaki and the fantasy novelist George R.R. Martin. The game focuses around a complex series of greater and lesser boss fights, as well as challenging mobs, all within the context of a larger history and lore, as well as a vast open-world landscape. Players make their way through the game, discovering the story and the dynamic universe of the lands between. Now, I think there are several main components to Elden Ring's sustained success. 3, to be exact. The first one goes by the name of Hidetaka Miyazaki. Miyazaki is a Japanese game designer who joined FromSoftware Games in 2004 working on the game Armored Core. A few years later, he took over as a director for the game Demon's Souls, which had a slow start and was even considered a failure at the time before eventually succeeding with international distribution. Miyazaki continued this role, and in 2014, after the great success of Dark Souls 1, he was named president of FromSoft Games. Despite his new role and its adjacent responsibilities, Miyazaki has continued to direct some of the most iconic titles from FromSoft, including, of course, Elden Ring. Now, I don't know a ton about the gaming industry, but the idea of an executive who started out as a regular employee, a game designer, writer, and creative director, now serving as the president of a company is a unique and fascinating situation. He's basically carrying the entire company on his back, and I think the fact that he works both as the president and the director of some of the most popular titles of the gaming company is the key to their success. I am a firm believer that there is a way to bridge the gap between cold corporate calculation and the romantic artist's vision, and I think that Hidetaka Miyazaki is living proof of that. If you take a look at Elden Ring and the other Soulsborne games, Miyazaki has married the business concept of niching down and finding a particular and loyal audience with the idea and philosophy of strict adherence to an artistic vision. And by combining these two ideas and finding their common ground, Miyazaki's had great success. I mean, this quote perfectly sums up the philosophy with which he approaches his games. I think one of the studio's characteristics is to embrace wholeheartedly what we feel is interesting, what we perceive to be worthwhile, cool, or beautiful, and to place these ideals at the foundation of the games we make. Which brings me to my next point, the gameplay. Something that Miyazaki has stuck to, stood firm on, regardless of its effect on game popularity or game sales, is challenging gameplay. Unlike other video games, Elden Ring has no easy mode. There's only one difficulty level, and it's all hard. Now, while I know a lot about Elden Ring and its lore, history, and just overall fantasy world building, for the sake of transparency, I have to admit I've never actually played the game. I've been toying with the idea of doing playthroughs of Elden Ring and some of the other FromSoftware games on the channel, so, if that's something you'd be interested, comment down below. And honestly, I considered not making this video at all, but I decided to go ahead, really leaning into the fact that I am an outsider and seeing what that perspective could lend to the situation. But for this portion, I did my research and made sure to talk to friends of mine who have played it. See, unlike the Elder Scrolls games or The Witcher, Elden Ring's focus is mainly the boss fights. There are still smaller enemies, but they are much less disposable than in other games, and every opponent, great or small, has their own unique fighting style, design, and gameplay challenges. Because of the difficulty level, the game encourages tense and highly competitive gameplay. It gives the player a sense of stakes and eventually immense satisfaction at their victory. Or, a never-ending frustration. Elden Ring doesn't hold your hand. There isn't a story mode per se, and players can go through the landscapes in a multitude of ways. There's flexibility, which opens the door for creative playstyles and unique playthrough experiences. All of this results in uniquely engaging gameplay and an incredible video game. Which brings me to my final point, the last piece in the puzzle which I think makes Elden Ring a masterpiece: the lore. Before we get into this section, I have to say that almost every single plot point of the Elden Ring story is contested by theorists, but I'm still going to do my best to summarize it anyway. Long ago, there was an Empyrean named Queen Marika, chosen by the Greater Will to ascend to godhood. Her reign was long and magnificent, but on the night of the Black Knives, the rune of death was stolen, and the world descended into chaos. The shattering ensued, and the Elden Ring was broken. The demigods began a great and terrible war, struggling amongst themselves for rulership of the lands between. Now, as an unnamed player, a Tarnish, you find yourself in these same lands between, with an unknown mission and an unknown goal. It's so much more complicated than that, and while I've been a student of the game and the lore for quite some time, I can't even keep everything straight. Now, why is that, you ask? Is it because I just have holes in my brain and I can't remember things? I mean, look, maybe a little bit, but what makes the Elden Ring story so unique is that, unlike other games, it doesn't really take center stage. It's told instead through whispers of ancient histories, in item descriptions and detailed landscapes. The clothing, weapons, and dialogue of each enemy you face is riddled with clues about their history and role in the greater narrative. Just like the real world, there's often not a clear path or a reliable narrator, but the only way to create a story like this is with the greatest attention to detail. I mean, there are dozens of YouTube channels dedicated solely to documenting and discovering the lore of Elden Ring and the other FromSoft games, and I just think that's so cool. To build hype for the Elden Ring DLC, which is now the highest rated DLC of all time, FromSoft released a single picture, and the internet went wild. A single picture. Some people might think that's crazy, but I think it's simply a testament to the insane amount of passion, love, and detail put into the Elden Ring narrative. Undeniably, Elden Ring is a masterpiece, having had an incredible impact on pop culture, fantasy, and the whole gaming industry in general. I mean, Elden Ring and these other FromSoft games literally sprouted a sub-genre of games called Souls-like games because they were so popular. And I think the persevering popularity of Elden Ring has everything to do with the creator, the gameplay, and the story of the game itself. But these are just my thoughts and opinions on the matter. Do you agree? I mean, what do you think makes Elden Ring so popular? Let me know in the comments down below, and as always, keep reading, keep writing, and keep gaming. I guess? Honestly, I'm kind of worried about you gamers. Just let me know in the comments down below, and as always, keep reading, keep writing, and keep gaming? I mean, unless it's like past 12 hours and then, it's probably time for bed. I don't know.